Hello everyone, bachphotography here with another video. Today we're going to be looking at 4 photo shoots that I did in one day with 3 different models. If you've been watching for a while, you'll recognize a few faces here. We have Jess, Tylisha, and Julie, and we're going to be shooting in 4 different locations, all under the one roof in this studio. We started shooting off in this pink room, and all the sets for this photo shoot were super awesome, so thank you to Creative Studio for hosting this event. We shot with Tylisha and with Jess in this particular set, and we got some really nice photos because both of their outfits really worked well with the pink set. And whenever you can, I think it's really important to make sure that your model's outfit matches the set of the shoot. So because Jess here is wearing white and the background is mainly white and pink, it works really, really well in this instance. We shot only using the available light on every single one of these sets, so we had to get quite creative with where we placed our model to get a nice lighting condition in the image, because it was quite dark, even though we had quite a few different pink lights on set. So that created a really nice challenge and meant that we had to get creative and use all the different areas in each set to find out where the best photo could be taken. So let's have a look at some of the photos I got on this location, and then we'll break down one of the photos into a bit more detail. Okay, so now let's break down one of the photos. This is the photo that I'm going to choose to break down, and it's my favorite photo so far. We shot at an aperture of f1.4, which is the brightest my camera lens could go, and I was shooting on the Sigma 50mm f1.4. And we used this aperture because I wanted to get as much light as possible onto the scene, and also I wanted to really blur out the background so that it was obvious to the subject where they should be looking in the image, and just to add some separation between the background and Jess. We were shooting at a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second, which is quite a slow shutter speed for handheld. You can go a bit slower, but I don't like to shoot much slower than this because then you're going to start introducing camera shake into the image, but we had to shoot at a slow shutter speed because there wasn't that much light available. And finally we shot at an ISO of 1000 because even with f1.4, which is a super bright aperture, and 1/160th of a second, which is a quite bright shutter speed, we still didn't have enough light in the scene, so I had to boost my ISO and get as much light as I could into the image. Now because we did that, I had to do quite a bit in Photoshop to denoise the photo and make it look nice and sharp, but after that I'm really happy with how this image turned out. So here we are at the next location, which is a really cool sort of cloud looking set, and we have all of these clouds made out of cotton wool and then just strung up with fishing wire onto the ceiling. So the challenge here is going to be shooting with all the clouds around our model and also photoshopping out or making sure that all of the fishing wire is out of the frame when we're shooting. You can also see here that the stage is not very high, so we're going to have to make sure not to have any of the ceiling or the outside walls in the shot. I shot here with Jess, Tylisha, and with Julie, and I think this was probably one of my favorite sets of the entire photo shoot. I really like how the clouds were made, and I think that put extra lights inside the clouds to make the clouds look more dark and stormy, and I think that was a really nice touch to this set, something that could have been overlooked but made a massive difference in the photos. Tylisha had this prop which looked like a book but was actually a box, so what we did is we put 2 phones inside the box and turned the torches on and then put some cloud on top of the phones, and it made it look like she was reading a book with clouds and lights coming out of the book, and I thought that was a really cool prop for this photo shoot. So if you're enjoying this content so far, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me a lot in the YouTube algorithm, so thank you very much for subscribing. So now let's have a look at some of the photos I got on the cloud set. I hope you like the photos, and let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. I think that this set had so much potential, and I really wish I had a little bit more time to get better photos, but here is the photo that I liked the most out of the 3 photos I just showed you. I really like the idea behind this shot, but I think that it would be executed much better if we'd had brighter lights in the box, because it would have been really cool if we could have illuminated Tylisha's face and used the light from the box to illuminate her face. It would have framed her jawbone really nicely, and it would have just added a little bit more interest into the image. But even though we didn't have a really bright light, I still think this shot was really cool and a really nice idea, so that's why I chose this photo as my favorite. So here we are at the 3rd photo shoot, and this one was really cool as well. We had kind of like a yellowy green jungle theme, and then there was a bath in the middle full of clear balls. I really liked this area because it was really well lit, much more bright than the other sets, which meant I could shoot at faster shutter speeds and lower ISOs and get really nice, clean, crisp images. And also it was just so green. So we have a really pink area, a really blue area, and now a really green area. It means that we can get some really interesting photos where everything is going to look completely different. I asked Tylisha to sit in this direction so that I could use the light in the background as a backlight to add a little bit of green and also some yellow light to the back of her hair. I just thought this rim light would be an interesting touch and add a little bit more of a three-dimensional look to the image and separate her from the background of the set. In this location, I tried to keep the bath out of the frame as much as possible because I thought that it kind of took away from the entire scene. I thought the jungle was really interesting in the background, so I kind of tried to keep that in the frame instead of having the bath as one of the main subjects of the image. Because this scene was set up in a U-shape rather than having a traditional flat backdrop behind our subject, I had a lot of flexibility to move around the scene and get a lot of different angles in this photo shoot, so that was really handy to try out a few different things and see what worked best with the lighting. Now let's have a look at a couple of photos that I took in this scene. It was hard for me to choose which of these photos was my favorite, but I think this is the one that's my favorite. And that's because I like the framing of the image. I think that the wall of the bath is a nice leading line towards Jess. The background is interesting, but it's still blurry enough that it's not distracting from the subject of our image, which is Jess here. This photo was taken on a 35mm lens with an aperture of f1.4, a shutter speed of 1/20th of a second, and an ISO of 100. And we shot at a shutter speed of 1/20th of a second so that I could shoot at the ISO of 100, which is my base ISO for the Sony A7R4 camera. And that meant that we got the most crisp and clean image we could possible from the camera. And if you're unsure on any of the terminology I've used in this video, then you need to check out my photography course from absolute beginner all the way to an advanced portrait photographer. It's going to teach you everything you need to know about camera equipment, lighting equipment, how to set up your camera, what settings you need to use, how to manipulate light in the best way, how to pose your subjects, and everything else you will need to know about portrait photography to take amazing photos. Right now there's a 10% off discount for the next 30 days, so check out the link in the description if you're interested in that. Here we are at the fourth location, and this one was really cool again. It was a huge wall covered in neon lights, and all of the neon lights gave off different colors, which meant that we had a really interesting lighting condition for this photo shoot. I think this was probably the most challenging area of all of the photo shoots just because the lighting was so crazy and interesting, but you'll see in a minute just what we got from this photo shoot, and you can let me know in the comments which one you think is the best. I tried shooting at the wall from different angles. I tried straight on, perpendicular to the wall, and I also tried from the side as well, and both of them yielded completely different results, which I thought was very interesting. When we were shooting down the line at the wall, I also used my phone as a reflector, and we got some really interesting shots where you could get the neon lights reflected into the image again from the other side. I think the photos that were straight onto the wall turned out better, but this is why I think it's really important to try lots of different angles when you're in a location, because you never know what's going to look good and what might not turn out so great. So now let's have a look at the photos that we got from setup number 4, and then we'll jump into Photoshop and do an edit on one of the photos. And I'm going to leave a link in the description to all of the raw files from this photo shoot so you can edit them yourself or follow along in this video. So I think this is probably my favorite photo out of all of those, although I like a lot of those photos. I think a lot of them are really cool. I like this one because I think the pose is strong and I think the background is interesting, but also the rim light around Jess doesn't take away from her. I think it actually separates her from the background, which is really cool. This photo was shot at an aperture of f1.4 again, because even though the lights are really interesting, I wanted to make them a little bit blurry just so the subject of the image, Jess, is really brought to the front of the photo. We shot at 1/160th of a second because this is the slowest I really feel comfortable shooting handheld. And then we bumped the ISO up just a little bit to 320 so that we could get a nice exposure in the image. So before we move on to the editing section of this video, I'd like to thank you for watching it so far, and please let me know in the comments which of these 4 photo shoots is your favorite. I'm having a really hard time deciding which one is best, and I had a very hard time deciding which photo to edit. So if you'd also like me to make an extra video editing a few different photos, let me know about that in the comments as well. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop in Camera Raw, which is a plugin that turns on when you shoot in RAW. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some clarity and some exposure, just to make the contrast pop from the image, the mid-tone contrast, and also add just a bit more brightness to the scene. We're going to add some vibrance as well to make those pinks really pink, and then just drop the highlights a bit so we're not clipping anywhere apart from the neon light. Now I'm going to get a brush tool and just add in a little bit more pink all around the area, but I don't want to add any pink to Jess because I want to maintain her skin tones. I don't want her skin to look too pink, but I want everything else to look pink. So that's what I was doing with the paintbrush there. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of exposure, and I'm also going to change the color balance here just so that Jess's eyes look more white, just so they look a little bit more natural. And then that's everything I'm going to do for the eyes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the exposure and the blacks and reset my brush tool and just paint in all the areas that I'd like to make the skin a little bit smoother. And I'm just making everything here really black so I can see exactly where I've painted, and then I can make sure not to go over any areas that I don't want to smooth. Because when you're smoothing skin in this technique, you don't want to go over the eyes, the eyebrows, or any contrasting lines, for example on the nose or the lips or on the jawline. So every other area of the skin, places like the arms and the chest and the cheeks, they're all fine to be smooth, but you want to make sure just not to touch any areas that you want to keep sharp. I also like to do the hands as well, although it's something you don't have to do, but I think that getting every little piece of skin possible really helps in this editing technique. Okay, so now that we've got everything selected, I'm going to reset my brush tool and just drop the clarity a little bit. You can see if I boost it really high, it really brings the details out, but because this is skin, we want to make it nice and smooth, so we're just going to drop it about 30 points. The next thing I'm going to do here is just add a little bit more contrast into the eyes, because when I added the exposure before, the more exposure you add, the lower the contrast the image is going to be. So if you're going to boost the exposure up, let's say one stop, you have to add that contrast back in either by darkening the shadows or brightening the highlights in post-production. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into native Photoshop. So we're done with Camera Raw for now. I'm going to jump into Photoshop, and if you don't get into Camera Raw and you want to use the Camera Raw filter, you can go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and jump straight back into it. But we're not going to do that right now. We're going to go into the Liquify tool, where you click a filter and then Liquify. And what we're going to do here is just adjust our brush and then pull the hair out a little bit more and just make Jess's hair look a little bit more full and thick. And this is something I like to do with all portraits pretty much where the model has long hair, because I think long hair is a sign of health, and the thicker and longer your hair looks, if it is long, the better I think it's going to look. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the patch tool and just smooth the skin even more with frequency separation, which is basically where we're going to circle an area of the skin with the patch tool and then drag that area into a part of the skin that is smooth. And what that does is it gets rid of the texture of the skin. So we keep all of the colors and exposures, but any imperfections in the skin, anything we want to get rid of in the skin, can get removed this way. So I'm going to speed up this process here just because it can get a little bit boring to watch, and I'll see you in about 10 seconds. Okay, so that's everything for skin smoothing, and you can see that that makes a really big difference to the image. I'm going to jump back into Camera Raw now by clicking Filter, Camera Raw Filter. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool and just reset all of my sliders here, all back to 0, and then I'm going to add some whites just to the bright areas of Jess's skin. So we're just adding a little bit more exposure to those areas just to make her skin kind of look more three-dimensional and pop a little bit more from the image. So just the areas that I can see on the face that are looking particularly bright, like the cheekbone and the nose. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the dark areas on Jess's face. So things like the jawline, and then we're going to do a bit on the forehead and on her left eye as well. And this just adds a little bit more contrast to the image, but it gives you a little bit more control than just sliding the contrast slider up. So that's everything for that. I think I added maybe just a little bit too much on the right hand side of her chin there. So I'm just going to use the patch tool in a second to circle that area that I don't like and then just drag it back into a smooth part of the skin. And I think that looks much better. So we're almost done now with this photo. Just a couple more things left to do. One thing I noticed when I was really zoomed in on this photo is it's quite a noisy image because we were shooting at ISO 1000, and that's just something you can't really get away from if you're shooting at high ISOs. So one thing I like to do is go to Filter and then Noise and then click Despeckle. And as you can see, everything just gets smoothed out and you can remove a bit of noise this way. Just make sure to not despeckle your image too much, because you will lose a little bit of sharpness, and that's kind of the trade-off between a unnoisy image and a smooth image. So that's everything for this photo. I really hope you like it. Let me know if you want me to film editing any of the other photos, and I'll be happy to make a video about that too. Remember, all the raw files are in the description, and check out my course if you'd like to learn more about photography and how to really up your game and become a world-class photographer when it comes to portraits. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.